The camping and caravanning club members only site at Claycroft Farm near Dalbeattie is an excellent base for touring the southeast of Scotland. A little path from the site leads down through the meadows to Water.
The owner Jason was canoeing on the river, whilst daughter Georgia and the dog were having a swim. For a moment there I thought there was a zebra in the next field, but no, it's a horse in a fancy coat.
Our first trip out began in the market town of Dumfries, where the River Nith flows through the middle of the town and into the Solway Firth. The river is crossed by the Devogilla Bridge. Caerlaverock Castle is a moated triangular castle built in the 13th century on the east bank of the river, about 7 miles south of Dumfries. It was partially demolished in 1640. A wide moat, twin-towered gatehouse and lofty battlements make it the epitome of a medieval stronghold.
On the other side of the river is the Kirkconnell Flow Nature Reserve, a quiet woodland with a couple of marked walks. The Solway Coast Road starts here.
The first stop on the route is at New Abbey and the Cistercian monastery of Sweetheart Abbey, founded in 1275 and built of local red sandstone. Although the monastery was disestablished in 1624, the graveyard is still in use today.
Some of these gravestones look a bit unstable. A little further south there are views along the estuary towards Gretna. The road then turns west and comes to the long beach at Sandy Hills. Finally it comes to Rockcliffe before heading back north to Dalbeattie.
Carlingwalk Loch is a very attractive sheet of water on the fringes of the town of Castle Douglas.
Just to the south of Castle Douglas is Threave Garden, which belongs to the National Trust of Scotland. It has been created over the years by students of the Trust School of Heritage Gardening, which is based here. It's divided into a number of smaller gardens, and this one is the walled garden. The Red Bridge gives views over the pond. The main path then passes Threave House and comes to the Garden of Contemplation, a new feature for 2019. The path then continues through the estate and ends at the shop, of course.
To the northeast of Threave is Loch Ken, a 9-mile long, narrow freshwater loch. At the top of the loch we turned west into the Galloway Forest Park and came first to Clattering Shores Loch. This freshwater reservoir was created by damming the Galloway River Dee as part of a hydroelectric scheme. A narrow road runs along the western shore of the loch. The land here is owned by the Forestry Commission. At the edge of a harvested area, the wind had uprooted many of the trees.
Traffic has to give way to forestry work.
We rejoined the main forest road and stopped to see the red deer. At the viewing area, visitors were giving them treats.
Don't you dare touch my antlers.
The road left the forest, and then we drove down the east coast of Wigtown Bay to Carslouth Castle, a ruined tower house dating from the 16th century.
The owners of the castle emigrated to India in 1748 and it hasn't been occupied since.
2.5 miles east is Cairn Holy. This is the site of 2 chambered tombs. The tombs were built by early farming people who lived here in the Neolithic period between 6,000 and 4,000 years ago. A narrow track runs between the 2 tombs, which were designed to house the remains of many people and were in use over several centuries.
As the sun went down behind the tombs, we returned to the caravan for the night.
Surrounded by farmland 4 miles south of Dalbeattie is Orchington Tower. Built in the late 15th century, it's the only cylindrical tower house in Scotland.
No one's lived here since 1785.
3 miles further south, a narrow road leads to the tiny hamlet of Balcarry. The road ends at Balcarry Point, where there's a secluded beach with lovely views across the bay. Going round the headland, the next place of interest is Dundrennan Abbey. This Cistercian monastery, established in 1142, is where, in 1568, Mary Queen of Scots spent her last night in Scotland.
The poor woman was imprisoned in England and eventually beheaded in 1586. The last stop of the day was Kirkcudbright, which has a very pleasant marina. From the town, whose harbour is used by scallop fishing boats, there are views over the marina and down Kirkcudbright Bay.
To go from Dalbeattie to the Wigtown Peninsula, one has to go through Gatehouse of Fleet, and it's worth a diversion up the Fleet Valley to see the viaduct at Big Water of Fleet. Built in 1861 for the Portpatrick and Wigtownshire Railway, this 900-foot single-track viaduct has 20 arches and is 70 feet high. In 1926 the piers were clad with red brick, resulting in a very unusual appearance. The railway closed in 1965.
Garliston is halfway down the Wigtown Peninsula. This was once an important port for goods being brought into the Macars, as the area is known, in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
At the tip of the peninsula, at Isle of Whithorn, there's an inlet with a tiny sheltered harbour, which was used by pilgrims visiting St Ninian's Chapel, where they gave thanks for a safe journey, at a time when travel by sea was always a lottery. The existing chapel dates back to about 1300, although it was probably built on the site of a smaller chapel built in the 1100s.
After visiting the chapel, the pilgrims would set off on foot to cover the 3.5 miles to St Ninian's Shrine at Whithorn.
Then we drove through Isle of Whithorn to return to the campsite. On our last day we went to the Rins of Galloway, the 25-mile-long hammerhead peninsula in the far west of Dumfries and Galloway. The pretty village of Portpatrick is on the west coast of the Rins. It was founded on fishing, and the boats were based in the sandy crescent-shaped harbour, which is still the focal point of the village. It's also the base for the local lifeboat.
The inner harbour is the starting point of the Southern Upland Way. The Portpatrick Hotel, built in 1905, sits on the cliffs above.
At the southern end of the village is a parking area from where you can walk to the rocky coastline with its deep, narrow inlets. Further south, on the east side of the peninsula, is Ardwell.
From the gently sloping sandy beach, small boats can be launched into Loose Bay.
South again and back on the west coast is Port Logan, a planned village built in 1818. The causeway leads to the quay and a bell tower designed by Thomas Telford. From the bell tower one can see lobster fishermen lifting their pots before returning to the harbour, where the boats are taken out of the water. Back on the east coast and even further south is Drummore, the most southerly village in Scotland. The harbour was originally built to serve the lime manufacturing industry before passing to the Ministry of Defence to manage their Loose Bay bombing range.
The oyster catchers were going through a mating ritual on the pebbles. This area has an almost tropical feel.
The zigzag route down the peninsula becomes a narrow single-track road as it heads further south. Eventually it comes to the stunning Mull of Galloway, where there seem to be more people than on the whole of the rest of the peninsula. Here there are steep cliffs which are home to hundreds of nesting seabirds. At the end of the Mull, across the fields of heather, is the lighthouse, which was built in 1830 by Robert Stevenson and is still in use today. The automatic light stands 325 feet above sea level and can be seen from 32 miles away.
In the distance one can just make out the Isle of Man under the strip of cloud. The Mull is an RSPB reserve and more birds nest below the lighthouse, right on the southernmost point in Scotland.